The wind came in a little too strong, I noticed, as it moved through the trees with a soothing, whispering sound, carrying the smell of rain on its trail. Although I was exhausted, I didn't feel like going to bed yet. I stood by the bedroom window, unsure of what to do. I could read the newspapers I bought earlier that morning or watch the late-night news on TV. Unable to settle on either, I finally succumbed to the cool weather and the inviting comfort of my king-sized bed. One sudden turn in my sleep signaled the start of another day. Waking up at 4 a.m. had become routine. I began my usual chores, preparing breakfast and, if I had time, starting on dinner for later. An hour later, I woke the children to get them ready for the day. I took pride in being able to care for my two sons, Solomon and Paa Kwesi. Thankfully, at ages 11 and 7, they were good children, at least most of the time. School was fortunately within walking distance, but I drove them to the gates before heading to work. Work was as a salesman in a shopping mall. My hands were always full, especially at the end of the month when customers' wallets and purses swelled. The pay was decent, not enough to make me forget God, but not so little as to make me defy His name. I loved my job, even though it often brought me home late in the evening. That's where my concern for my children came in. My immediate neighbor was a self-avowed bachelor who was rarely home. My only maternal aunt lived far away, and although she always offered to have the children stay with her, I couldn't bear to be separated from them. So, they stayed indoors until I returned, sometimes eating a delayed dinner, sometimes growing uneasy from the quiet. I could see the despondency in their faces whenever I came home. Despite the uncertainties, time didn't wait for us. The days flew by quickly, and soon Solomon gained admission into a secondary school. It was with a heavy heart that I let him go, but I consoled myself with the thought that teachers also played a role in nurturing children, and they would take good care of him. I prayed that my instructions would be written on his heart and that he would not depart from them. On the home front, things became more complicated. I was left with no one to look after Paa Kwesi. I had to bring him to the mall, where he stayed with me until I closed from work. It was tiring for him. His eyes would grow heavy, and I often found him asleep in random corners of the mall. He also started losing his appetite. Solomon's return home for his first vacation lifted Paa Kwesi's spirits tremendously. He came back full of stories about school. In our living room, he acted out pranks and the daily survival tricks students used, much to Paa Kwesi's delight. My youngest son laughed until his sides hurt, wishing the years would pass quickly so he could join his brother. But Solomon would leave again soon, and that caused me great unease. Then, Providence sent a permanent solution to my problem. Paa Kwesi now had somewhere safe to stay until I came home. I breathed a sigh of relief. Single parenting was more stressful than I had ever imagined, and no one could truly understand how much it drained you unless they had been through it themselves. I hadn't started dating again after Eva's death. I loved her dearly and couldn't imagine replacing her so soon. Her passing left me feeling lost and forlorn. It was a freak accident. She was 7 months pregnant with our third child. On a rainy Saturday in June, she slipped at the marketplace. We lost the baby, and she passed away a month later. My aunt, Alice, who was 64, became my pillar of strength. Though she didn't move in with us, she was always a shoulder to cry on. She shopped and cooked for us, and took the boys to her home during the holidays. But after 2 years, she said to me,
"Martin, you'll never get over the death of a loved one. You'll just get used to them being gone. You have to move on."
"It feels cruel to forget Eva," I replied.
"You're not forgetting her. You're moving on with life."
"Doesn't that make me unfaithful to her memory?"
"Don't be silly. It would be good for the children to have a woman in their lives again."
I took her advice, but I hadn't acted on it. 8 years had passed, and I had become accustomed to the status quo. I remember how difficult it was for the children to pick their favorite teacher. They were both academically good, and all their teachers treated them kindly. But in the second term of that year, Paa Kwesi found his favorite, Miss Senna. As it turned out, she had been living behind our house all these years. Before the term ended, the school decided to organize extra classes for the upper primary and junior high students. Paa Kwesi begged to stay with Miss Senna, who lived just a few houses away, until I returned home. I was grateful for her help, but that was all. Then, Paa Kwesi came down with a cold. I had dealt with many illnesses with my boys and knew how heartbreaking it was to see them suffer. I spent sleepless nights watching over them, refusing to close my eyes in case something happened while I wasn't watching. Senna offered to take care of my little boy until he got better, but I refused outright. How could I sit at home each evening knowing my son was suffering just a stone's throw away? His nostrils were clogged, and, as with his previous attacks, his breath would often stop for a few seconds as he struggled to exhale. Senna wouldn't know what to do. My son could die while she slept. No one could care for my children the way I did, and besides, she wasn't Aunt Alice. How could a stranger take proper care of my child? I couldn't bear the thought of losing another loved one due to negligence. I argued with myself, but Senna eventually persuaded me to leave the ailing child in her care. When I called Aunt Alice, she said I was being paranoid. Suddenly, Senna was in and out of our home, cleaning and cooking in every room except mine. She had practically taken over. One day, I saw her home when it was rather late for a young woman to walk alone. The breeze was cool, and I enjoyed it. On my way back, without warning, my mind was flooded with memories of the evening strolls I used to take with Eva. A strange feeling began to stir in the pit of my stomach each time Senna said goodnight. I secretly wished she would stay a little longer, and I found myself worrying when she wasn't around. A framed photo of my late wife seemed to shame me into guilt each time, but the feeling lingered. One Friday evening, while Paa Kwesi was engrossed in a movie, I took a small package and walked to Senna's door. I knocked and waited. A broad smile spread across her face when she saw me.
Will you please come in, sir?
She asked. No, I've left PK all alone. I just came to give you this, I said, handing over a hamper containing bottles of fruit juice and some biscuits. She received them excitedly and went inside to put them away, then saw me off at the gate. I realized I had a silly smile plastered on my face the entire way home. I even caught myself whistling as I took a brisk bath that evening. One day, my Aunt Alice came by. She kept looking at me, scrutinizing me closely. "Why are you staring at me, Aunt Alice?" I asked. She laughed and said,
"You're looking buoyant, and you've stopped complaining about everything over the phone. What's your secret?"
At that moment, Senna breezed in with her usual cheerfulness. Aunt Alice's eyebrows lifted mischievously.
"This is what I've been telling you for years.
She said.
You need a wife."
"I don't need a wife. She's just taking care of my son," I protested.
"You're blind, my son. You haven't even noticed the change she's brought into your lives. PK is skipping around like a little goat."
She teased. I laughed despite my discomfort with the conversation.
"Ask her what she thinks about this relationship."
Aunt Alice said. "There is no relationship, Aunt Alice. I'm 18 years older than she is."
You're both adults.
She replied, and went off to join Senna in the kitchen. Whatever they discussed, I didn't want to hear it. I could see the sly look on my aunt's face as she left. One fine Saturday evening, after a light drizzle, we decided to watch a movie. When it ended, Senna got up to leave. Somehow, between an armchair and the coffee table, we ended up in each other's arms. What happened next was no accident. I pulled her close and kissed her.
Hi guys, hope you enjoyed part 1 of Stepping In. Things will begin to shift in Martin's life. Unexpected feelings, old memories, and new possibilities. What happens when the walls he's built to protect himself begin to crumble? How will Solomon and Paa Kwesi, his beloved sons, navigate these changes? What do you think lies ahead of Martin and his boys? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't miss the next chapter of this Heartfelt story. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for Stepping In Party coming soon.